In 1993, a man wearing a red suit went to Springfield. That man had a vision. A vision of conning a community out of $3 million. In addition to a monorail, Lyle Lanley brought something else to Springfield. Grifting plots on The Simpsons. Oh sure, seasons 1 through 3 featured plenty of lies and deceptions. The repairman offering free cable, Bart pretending to be Timmy O'Toole. I'm pretty sure Herb Powell's baby translator was a total sham. But when you think of grifting specifically, you tend to think of the confidence men like Mr. Lanley. These charismatic charlatans who use social engineering tactics to swindle people out of their money. They often prey upon people's generosity and sense of empathy. Over the course of the series, The Simpsons has done 5 major grifting episodes, spanning nearly 30 years. Today, let's look at how these stories evolved. Let's look at how the writers handled this subject, how they portrayed our favorite characters, and how things often got messy in their resolution. At the very least, I expect Homer to learn a very convoluted lesson. In the DVD commentary of Marge vs. the Monorail, Al Jean joked about how ridiculously complicated and involved Lyle Lanley's plan is. So let's get this straight. You're going to grift the Springfield government out of $3 million by engineering an extremely complex construction project that involves hiring and training numerous people for several weeks, all under the watchful eye of nosy 8-year-olds, their moms, and the media? Well, I'll grant him that he certainly believes in himself. We all know the plot of Marge vs. the Monorail is cuckoo bananas, and that's what we love about it. It's funny because it's such a stupid grift, this traveling monorail salesman. But as silly as it is, it obviously does depict a real-world phenomenon, that we have governments with very public needs and very public budgets allocated to them, which is going to attract swindlers like Lyle Lanley. And it does make some sense that Mayor Quimby is not just going to write a $3 million check to this guy. This scheme does require him to go through the motions. This episode emphasizes the personality-driven aspect of the grift. How Lanley preys upon their rivalry with Shelbyville to draw them in, how he has a catchy song to close the deal. Then with Lisa, he appeals to her ego, disarming her with some cheap flattery. Many of his cons are meant to highlight how stupid the people of Springfield are. Take the undercover reporters, for example. But even someone as astute as Lisa can be taken in by these flim-flam artists. All they have to do is figure out where their psychological weak point is. It really highlights how winning over the right people, the decision makers, the people with microphones, creates this collective blindness to the grift. The signs are right there in front of them. It should be clear how many corners are being cut. But nobody who matters sees it. They all become part of this cult of monorail. Someone like Marge can stumble onto all the definitive proof of the matter, but lack the leverage to do anything about it. I really appreciate this glimpse behind Lanley's facade right here, how truly sinister he is, and that they show us the negative outcome of his grift. If you think about it, the episode doesn't have to go to North Haverbrook and meet Sebastian Cobb. They could have come up with the anchor solution on their own. But I think it's important not only for its stakes, but to demonstrate how these grifts negatively affect communities. We think of Marge vs. the Monorail as a fun, lighthearted romp, but what happened to North Haverbrook is really dark. No one could ever accuse this episode of glorifying or justifying Lanley's hustle. They do make fun of Springfield's idiotic decisions, right up to the closing moments, but at the end of the day, this is a very traditional story of a villain who ultimately gets his just desserts. They didn't have to do this airplane scene. They could have just gone for the darker, cynical ending, that he just gets away with it. A cautionary tale. I'm not even sure how North Haverbrook even made this happen, to be honest. But that's one of the great things about classic Simpsons, how it can make that satirical point about Springfield's idiotic government, while still giving us that classic villain comeuppance. There's that streak of sitcom traditionalism that grounds Marge vs. the Monorail nicely. Ironically, the Monorail episode, as cuckoo bananas as it is the cleanest Simpsons grifting plot. I know, it's crazy. Just 4 years later, things are already getting messier. Ah, technology. Aren't we glad we live in a world where you can be scammed out of your money from your phone? It's funny that I'm talking about an episode from 1996 when I say this. With Homer's autodialer B-plot, we're getting away from the more personality-driven grift and more toward grift through repetition. Marge scolds Homer and characterizes this as tele-panhandling, but I don't think that's true. Happy Dude is more tele-snake oil sales. Obviously here, the scheme is to offer something you clearly cannot provide, in this case general happiness, and to only ask for $1, while pitching this thousands and thousands of times. The B-plot is demonstrating how technology doesn't require a convincing grift anymore, with a lot of maneuvering like Landley. Now, you can just bother everyone with your idiotic scheme, until by sheer numbers, someone will eventually fall for this. They make it abundantly clear with Burns and Frink that people are not buying what Homer's selling. Homer only makes $2. I think this episode was smart, from a likability perspective, to keep it such a small amount of money and to show how terrible Homer is at this grift. We would all hate him if people were sending in Benjamins and Homer was raking in thousands and thousands of dollars. They're playing it more as an annoying telemarketing thing, and less like a serious issue. However, as we know, the elderly population is especially vulnerable to these horrible telephone scammers. They prey upon their loneliness, their naivete, and their technological ignorance. The Simpsons is getting at something real right here, even at these extremely low stakes. That said, law enforcement still did take this somewhat seriously back in the 90s. Jimmy the Scumbag is going to prison, and Wiggum isn't mincing words about what awaits him. This is a world where the police will go after these guys. Wiggum even busts into the house to end Homer's scheme once and for all. However, in Homer's case, his punishment is to just apologize to everyone. I guess they let him off because he only stole $2. But, unlike with Landley's comeuppance, Homer just goes back to grifting, even in his apology message. So, this is a world where these guys will be punished for their bad deeds, but the punishments don't really matter and nothing will actually change. In some respects, there's shades of the monorail ending here. No one learns anything, they just keep doing what they're doing. This one feels more cynical by actively pointing out that law enforcement fails in preventing this from continuing. Homer the grifter gets no meaningful comeuppance here. What I don't understand is why didn't they just rig the whole judicial system to teach Homer a lesson? Oh wait. The Great Money Caper is the definitive grifting episode of The Simpsons. In some respects, it portrays the most classic and straightforward version. These con men who contrive a situation to extract money from passerbys. It's kind of a throwback, hearkening to the Great Depression in movies like The Sting. Unlike Lyle Landley's project-based scheme and the autodialer snake oil sales, Homer and Bart are going for a more emotional tactic. Here, they're appealing to our sense of empathy and common decency. They'll set up a situation, like Bart's ruined cake or his missing dog, to seek financial recompensation from their marks. This is an important distinction. The last two examples were about taking advantage of people's needs. There's an active quid pro quo going on. Whereas here, Homer and Bart are showing how our positive attributes get weaponized against us. Dr. Hibbert doesn't have to buy Bart a new dog. Technically, Kent Brockman doesn't have to pay for a ruined cake. But both do so because they feel bad and want to help him out. Interestingly, this episode doesn't use greed as Homer and Bart's initial motivation for the scheme. All this happens because of a freak accident that left them with a $6,800 bill. So, Homer rationalizes that the grifting simply balances out the universe. They're just taking back something that they should have never lost to begin with. I think this was partially to smooth over likability and characterization complaints. The story would come off way worse if they just started this because Homer wants a new car or whatever. You also notice, initially, the only victims of their con are wealthy Springfielders. At least in the first half, the writers are taking small steps to cushion the blow, not make Homer too much of a monstrous jerkass. Yes, even in the Scully era, they seem to consider this stuff. Still, it does paint a picture of the mental gymnastics people use to justify their shitty behavior. I'm not really doing anything bad to others, because I was dicked over for no reason. The whole world is unfair, so my actions don't really matter. In some respects, this is even more pathetic than someone like Lyle Lanley, that Homer cooks up this whole philosophical mantra to avoid facing his own dishonesty. Eventually, Bart even calls him out that the repairs are paid off, so why are we still doing this? This is the scene where the episode really turns on these two, despite their earlier behavior. You notice their final grift no longer takes advantage of people's sympathy. They're making a point that Homer and Bart have graduated to the Lyle Lanley school where there is a quid pro quo being offered. And once again, they're preying upon the elderly. Structurally, the writers escalate the situation well enough that the audience is rooting for everything to come crumbling down. Here's the question though. Is the ending of The Great Money Caper satisfying as a comeuppance? Because, once again, we have law enforcement stepping in to stop the grifters. But oops, that wasn't really law enforcement. Except it actually was, kinda, with the courts assisting Marge and Lisa to teach them a lesson. This episode still does live in a world where law enforcement will go after these guys, and they will get their just desserts. But instead of doing this straight, they go for the sitcom-y premise of let's teach the boys a lesson. The con men get conned, and then they get conned again. Everyone except Willie, I guess. He's the collateral damage. I do like this ending conceptually, of just turning the whole thing into a silly farce. Really lean into the absurdity of getting the whole justice system in on this lesson. It's very funny in that respect. My big criticism is that when you do the con men get conned ending, you have to insert indications that Marge and Lisa are up to something, so they can do the big reveal and it's satisfying as a twist. This is something season 23's The Book Job understood well. Whereas The Great Money Caper kind of throws its hands up in the air, admits any explanation is insulting to our intelligence, and ends with a non sequitur. I used to think this is one of the worst endings ever. It's still pretty cheap and lazy, but I have softened a little over the years. That I can enjoy the absurdist approach that they went for. It just doesn't jive that well with a grifting plot that's inherently about people contriving ridiculous situations. So it feels like they're putting a hat on a hat by going for this. Overall, The Great Money Caper is more of a romp rather than saying anything about how grifting affects people or communities. I think the most interesting aspect about it is how the characters rationalize it, as well as the writers twisting themselves into a pretzel trying to make the lesson interesting. When in doubt, surfs up. In season 15, The Simpsons ran it back to Homer playing the sympathy card in this B-plot. But this time, he's directly begging people for money, no elaborate setup required. Unlike in the last example, there isn't an unlucky cosmic event for Homer to rationalize about. No, here, he just wants to buy Marge a nice anniversary present. That's it. Okay, he does kinda get roped into it by this lady constantly taking pity on him. The episode frames it as the world suggesting he should do this. But still, it's clear that Homer is pretending to be homeless so he can buy fancy earrings. No one would give him anything if they knew. The episode is careful to not totally conflate Homer's situation with the homeless. In this scene, they imply that there's a carefully designed system for begging, a technique to it, but they stop short of moralizing about what these other folks should be doing. It's played more as a simple rivalry where Homer's taking money out of a community that actually needs it. In fact, they don't even get on his case until he continues doing it after he's reached his goal. It very much follows the pattern of The Great Money Caper in this regard. You got greedy, Homer. Where it swerves dramatically is in its resolution, when Marge discovers what Homer's done. Obviously, Marge needs to scold Homer and present the lesson that he shouldn't have done all of this. But the episode also grapples with that resolution being boring and sitcom-y. So, Marge selfishly chooses to keep the earrings as a constant reminder of what he's done. Sure, Marge, I totally buy it. From a characterization perspective, this is easily the biggest swerve in all these examples today. Marge consistently must condemn these activities. She has to be the old reliable, who stops the bad guys and teaches Homer a lesson. So after doing 3 other grifting stories involving Marge, I get their instinct to subvert our expectations. After all, as Marge said in Rosebud, why can't she be greedy once in a while? The Simpsons didn't do another conning or grifting spotlight until all the way in season 33 with Bart's in jail. And you can really tell, because the way the story unfolds, it's a completely different world they're now living in. At first glance, it feels like a sequel to the auto dialer B-plot. Grandpa gets scammed out of $10,000 by a guy pretending to be Bart in jail, needing money immediately to get out. We're running it back to phone scams, once again taking advantage of the elderly. Except this time, of course, Homer's not propagating the crime, and we're talking about a significant sum of money. This episode really gets into the victimhood of scams. Grandpa losing his savings and how it damages his relationships. Homer's absolutely furious that he fell for this, throwing away a potential inheritance. In Act 2, both of them go to self-help groups to deal with it, although Homer learns nothing and gets on Grandpa's case even worse. It's an interesting characterization. Homer, who has committed the most scams and grifts over the years, is the arrogant know-it-all. Homer's deeply cynical and has seen every trick in the book, declaring he could never be scammed. Of course, he's immediately humbled when they find out that he fell into this knife-selling pyramid scheme. Act 2 makes it abundantly clear that everyone in our modern world is susceptible to this stuff. But here's where things diverge significantly from anything we've seen so far. The family tracks down the scammer's location to get the money back and breaks in to confront them, only to find an ordinary office full of cubicle workers with their headsets. Chief Wiggum shows up and tells everyone to leave, not even arresting anyone. He says when shutting down one operation, another 5 pop up, so what is law enforcement really to do? Unlike in 99% of Simpsons episodes, Bart's in jail robs the family of any meaningful resolution in Act 3. The bad guy doesn't get caught, the family doesn't achieve anything, and they're left to wonder what the point of all this was. It's honestly one of the weirdest plot swerves in Simpsons history, how it goes out of its way to rob the audience of this catharsis. It's very Lester and Eliza. Instead, in Act 3, they take some stolen gift cards and pig out at a restaurant, the family succumbing to living in a world of grifting. Everyone except Marge, who does eventually give in. Then, via a very surreal fantasy sequence featuring Loki the Trickster God and a Bill Cipher cameo, the universe declares that they've finally taken away Marge's belief in the good of mankind. Wow, we've come a long way since the parody of the Music Man, haven't we? In a lot of ways, Bart's in Jail is a deeply, deeply cynical episode of The Simpsons. Unlike every other example today, there is no satisfying comeuppance for these grifters. No unexpected layover for Lyle Landley, no police break-in or phony court trial for Homer, no having his grift be discovered. According to The Simpsons, scammers are gonna scam, and there's nothing anyone's gonna do about the problem. You're on your own, kid. So instead, Bart's in Jail becomes an examination of how people are expected to live in that kind of modern world. Do you become cold and cynical like Homer, or a continuous scam victim like Grandpa? In the episode's final moments, Marge grapples with living with this new outlook, of viewing everyone around her suspiciously. In the end, she does choose to believe and give this woman $20 with the promise it will be paid back, and later is relieved that her belief in people was justified, although secretly it was Grandpa who sent it. Marge maintains her faith despite it being based on a lie. It's a very careful juggling act they're doing. We get that warm and fuzzy ending while still being a cautionary tale for the audience. I interpret Bart's in Jail as telling us that it's good to be like Marge and to try to have faith in the goodness of people. But it's also telling us about everything that's out there, the signs to look for, the pitfalls to avoid. I think it's saying that you can be smart without being a total cynic. But at some point, it's a leap of faith with people. I confess, I almost didn't do the Pokemon art video because I was afraid of being scammed. Of doing all that planning, spend all that money for internet randos to totally ghost me. Bart's in Jail does feel like The Simpsons' evolution of the traditional grifting plot, that now they're getting into the chilling effect of grifting. That maybe in the future, Dr. Hibbert isn't gonna help the next kid he sees on the boardwalk. Maybe people will stop helping the homeless. Maybe Grandpa will stop answering his phone and will miss something important. I know I don't answer my phone anymore to unknown callers. I think it's interesting how over the course of 30 years, we've seen The Simpsons go from a wacky monorail scheme where the bad guy gets his just desserts, all the way to this world-weary examination of our psyche. Is it just that the world changed that much, or has The Simpsons also become more world-weary? You notice that in almost all these examples today, the ending is somewhat unsatisfying. Springfield continues funding stupid projects, Homer continues autodialer grifts, we get no explanation for what happened, and Marge keeps the ill-gotten earrings. With all these examples, you can really see the different era styles in action. The cartoony and referential Season 4, the technological and modern Season 8, the madcap, seemingly random world of Season 12, the Homer-Marge marital focus of the teen seasons, the thoughtful and weird modern Simpsons era. You can see all the small techniques the writers use to get these grifting plots to work, to be acceptable to the audience. Subtle things like asking for a small amount of money, an unlucky accident, a repeated suggestion. Everybody hates scammers. It's tricky getting Homer into one of these plots without making us hate him. And it's difficult to not turn these into boring morality plays that teach us that stealing is wrong, wrong, wrong. I feel like that's why every Simpsons grifting episode ends up feeling weird. That we have to do these runaway monorails, surfing cutaways, and Loki kissing Marge. Being subversive about a grifting plot is gonna get messy quick, especially for an animated sitcom like The Simpsons. Now, this video wasn't meant to cover every time someone got conned on The Simpsons. Something like Bart Carney is much more straightforward. It's really when large groups get scammed when things get interesting. So let me know of any other major ones that I omitted today, or some of your favorites. I think it's inevitable we'll see The Simpsons keep going back to that well. I mean, Bart's in Jail was made in 2021. Grifters are gonna keep grifting after all. So look forward to Homer's crypto pump and dump scheme of 2027. I'm sure it will be extremely weird and will provide no definitive answers.